Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The Moore Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The Moore Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Listening from Amsterdam and across the world online. You're now watching The Moore Show and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm about to be joined with my guest, Arun Gandhi. Now, Arun is the fifth grandson of India's legendary leader, Mahatma Gandhi. Arun joins me now to discuss his social-political activism and the philosophy of nonviolence. Arun Gandhi, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
You know, it's such a privilege to have you on the show. The fifth grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. Wow. I remember watching the movie Gandhi just a few years ago, and it really, made me want to go to India and to go see it. Not just for like a spiritual experience, but just to go experience India as it is. Firstly, what did you think of the film Gandhi? Did it portray him honestly?
I think it portrayed his philosophy and his personality very well. But those who went to see it as a historic documentary were disappointed. But it was not meant to be a historic documentary, so they have taken a few liberties with the history there, but otherwise, as far as the philosophy and the personality are concerned, it was a beautiful movie.
Absolutely, it really was. It was so touching towards the end. I mean, it was such a tragic ending. What was that like to find? I mean, because you met him, didn't you, as well? You met your grandfather.
I did. I lived with him the last 2 years of his life. When I was from 12 to 14 years of age. And I remember some very important and very loving lessons that he taught me that made a very big difference in my life.
Oh, indeed it did. Indeed it did. I mean, the man changed so many people's lives. I don't think... I'd hate to think India in general has forgotten the non-violence that he taught, and we'll get a bit into that as we get into the show. There's so many questions for you, and I know we've got such limited time. So, let's just go to when you were 10, between 10 and 14. Now, at the time, I don't think you were living in India, were you at that time?
No, I was in South Africa. That's where my father, who was his second son, had volunteered to continue his work in South Africa. And so I was born in South Africa along with my two sisters. And we lived in South Africa. But because of the experiences with apartheid and all the humiliation and the beatings and all that that I suffered at a very early age, we went to India, and my parents gave me the opportunity to live with grandfather for 2 years. And what he taught me then really was life-changing.
That's right, because I believe that you were sort of you were beaten up, weren't you, by white people, by black people. I mean, that there was a lot of racial tension at that time, and I believe you actually went to the gym, did you not, to sort of beef yourself up to, to be able to fight these people?
Yes, I did. I started going to the gym and doing exercises and hoping to become strong so that I could fight back again. And what grandfather taught me was that anger is like electricity. It is just as useful and just as powerful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel electrical energy and bring it into our lives and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel energy in the same way so that we can use the energy of anger positively rather than destructively.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where it comes to the philosophy of non-violence. And just to remind people that the non-violent struggle was what Gandhi was against was from the British people, from the British rule of India at the time. And he was trying to implement non-violence to take India away from British rule, and eventually he did achieve that. And like I said at the beginning of this interview, if anyone wants to really find out about Gandhi, watch the film Gandhi. It's a great starting place, and you really get to see what some of the struggles of the people went through to gain independence, which is it's absolutely amazing. Okay, so you're 12 to 14 years old, you're with your grandfather, and now he then teaches you lessons in understanding anger as part of the non-violence philosophy, is that right?
Yes, because he felt that, if you want to really practice non-violence, you have to learn to control your anger and be able to use that energy constructively. So that is the first step in understanding Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence and practicing it. It's not just a tool. Lots of people today, especially people who interpreted Gandhi's philosophy, have always looked at nonviolence as a tool or a weapon to be used when convenient or discarded when not. Gandhi said that this is not a tool, it's a way of life. We have to change the culture of violence that dominates us today into a culture of nonviolence, and that can happen only when individually all of us begin to change and learn about nonviolence.
Right, okay. And we're going to get more into non-violence. I've got lots of questions on that. But just to sort of continue your story, which is all part of it as well. Now, I think you had to keep an anger journal, is that right?
Yes. One of the ways in which he said I could be able to channel the energy of anger into constructive ways is by writing a journal. But not writing to pour out the anger from within me into the journal, but writing the journal with the intention of finding a solution to the problem and then commit yourself to finding a solution. Now that is very important because today a lot of people do write an anger journal, but they simply pour their anger out into the journal, so every time they go back and read it, they're just reminded of the incident and they get angry all over again. So we don't want the journal to be a reminder of the incident. We want the journal to help us find an equitable solution to the problem so that we can solve it and put it behind us.
That's so true. That's so true. How the world would change if we just didn't come from violence towards each other in our actions. I mean, not everyone's coming towards violence in their actions, but there's a great majority that do. And also it can be violence against not just humanity, but the planet as well.
Yeah, it is. And this, that's why I said earlier that we have to look at this as the whole culture of violence. A culture of violence that dominates every aspect of our lives. Our sports, our language, our relationships, our entertainment, our politics, our religion, everything has become violent today. And when we live in that culture of violence and become a part of that culture of violence, then selectively using nonviolence now and then is not really going to be a great help. We need to be more conscious of this, and we need to try to change that culture of violence to a culture of nonviolence, and then everything will be working as it should be in a civilized society.
When you were that age, did you understand the scope of Mahatma Gandhi, of his worldwide fame, in a sense? Not that he needed to be famous, but it was a byproduct of what he was about. He became very infamous in the sense of for what he did for India.
I did understand his greatness, and one couldn't escape that, because whenever I traveled with him anywhere, I would see hundreds and thousands of people lined up or just congregating to get a glimpse of him. So one couldn't escape the fact that he was a very great person and a revered person. But I wouldn't say that at that age all the lessons that he taught me made any sense to me. I accepted them like another 12, 14-year-old kid. But the way he taught these lessons through stories and he didn't make me sit down and lecture to me. He would transform these lessons into a story, and at the right moment he would tell me that story. And those stories, they stuck in my mind. And as I grew up and began to reflect on all the things that he told me, that's when, everything began to make sense to me, and I began to understand what he was saying.
He charged for paid autographs in the end. And I believe that you tried to slip your autograph book into this pile, and he was like, "Well, where's the $5, for example, for this signature?" What was he trying to teach you there?
Well, what he was trying to teach me is that when you make a rule, it should be applied to everybody equally. You can't make exceptions to rules because you're related or you're closer to somebody or something. And this is what we generally do all the time. We make a rule and we apply it differently to different people. And that shouldn't be the case. We should apply it equally to everybody. So a law is a law. When you pass a law, it should apply to everybody equally, not selectively to some people, and some people get exempted from it. And that he made this rule about selling his autograph because he needed money for the work that he was doing for the poor people and the untouchable people. And he made the rule for everybody, and so even I was subjected to that rule. And he said that if you want my autograph, you will also have to pay for me like everybody else has to pay.
That's such a great teaching, though. Now I get it. Right, okay. Wow. That's something as simple as that can be pretty powerful. And also, there was a lesson, I believe, with a little pencil. And this was, if you could just go over what that lesson was for you and what...
Yeah, I think that is the most significant lesson there, and it gave me an insight into the depth and breadth of the philosophy of nonviolence. I was coming back from school and I had this little butt of a pencil in my hand, and I decided I needed a better pencil, and I just threw it away because I was so sure Grandfather would give me a new pencil. But that evening when I met Grandfather and asked him for a new pencil to do my lessons with, instead of giving me one, he subjected me to a lot of questions. He wanted to know how the pencil became small and where did I throw it away and why, and on, and I couldn't understand why he was making such a fuss over a little pencil until he told me to go out and look for it. And I said, "You must be joking." I said, "You don't expect me to look for a little pencil in the dark?" He said, "Oh, yes, I do. Here's a flashlight." And he sent me out, and I looked for the pencil and found it and brought it to him. And he said, now I want you to sit here and learn two very important lessons. The first lesson is that even in the making of a simple thing like a pencil, we use a lot of the world's natural resources. And when we throw them away, we are throwing away the world's natural resources, and that is violence against nature. And the second lesson is that because in an affluent society we can afford to buy all these things in bulk, we overconsume the resources of the world. And because we overconsume them, we are depriving people elsewhere of these resources, and they have to live in poverty. And that is violence against humanity. And that was the first time I realized that all of these little things that we do every day, consciously and unconsciously, the things that we overconsume and waste and throw away and destroy, and because we have so much of it, that all of that constitute violence either against nature or against humanity. To make me understand this lesson thoroughly, he made me draw a genealogical tree of violence, just as we do a family tree with violence as the grandparent and physical violence and passive violence as the two branches. And every day before I went to bed, I had to analyze and examine everything that I had experienced during the day and put them down in their appropriate places on that tree. If it was the kind of violence where no physical force is used, and yet our actions hurt people somewhere directly or indirectly, that would be passive violence, and that would go under the passive side. But if it's the kind of violence where we hurt people by killing and hitting and all of these physical things that we do to one another, then that would go under physical violence. And when I began to do this introspection, I was amazed how much passive violence grew on, and physical violence didn't, because there was a limit to how much physical violence one commits. But the passive violence just grew endlessly. And that is when he explained to me the connection between the two. And he said, we commit passive violence all the time, every day, consciously and unconsciously. And that generates anger in the victim. And the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is physical violence, it is passive violence that is fueling the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to become the change we wish to see in the world. If we don't look at our weaknesses and transform those weaknesses and make them into strength, we will never be able to create peace in this world.
No, that's so true. It's so empowering what you're saying there. And, you know, I've just moved from the UK to Amsterdam. And, you know, I've really had to get rid of a lot of stuff. And I've realized coming over here, I've got a very tiny room, right? And I've realized how much stuff I didn't need and how much stuff we consume that we never use, and we put it into storage in our house. And it's just, it is violence against the planet in a sense, because we never needed it in the first place.
Yeah, it is so many things we accumulate over the time, and we don't use them. And then we just throw them away, and you know, it's just amazing. I was reading in the New York Times the other day that in the United States alone, we throw away $160 billion worth of food every year. 160 billion with a B. You know, it's a huge amount of food that goes into waste, when there are so many people in the United States alone going hungry every day. Never mind the rest of the world.
That's so terrible, and the same in London and bigger cities. When I was in London, I always remember being in this takeaway, and they were just piling all this food that was still sealed, still in date. And
Yeah,
I said to them, "Well, where's all this food going?" And they said, "Well, we dispose of it." I said, "Well, you don't even give it to the homeless shelters." Like, well, no, it's we're not allowed to do that. I'm like, oh my God, this is just crazy.
yeah, it is crazy. But we have these expiration dates, and they really don't mean much because the food doesn't really get bad so quickly. But we have that wasteful habit, and that's part of the culture of violence that I talked about. We have created this whole culture of violence that has led to what we see in the world today: the disparities, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, and that's why all the crime and all the violence and terrorism and all of these things takes place because of that culture of violence and our wasteful habits.
So you think with problems like ISIS and other such issues around the world, you think it really is it can be connected to poverty in a sense, to those that have and those that don't have. You don't think it's actually maybe my truth is the only truth and yours it cannot be allowed.
No, I think we have gotten into the habit of looking at these incidents when they happen as a crisis, and we ignore the earlier things, and then when it blows up in our face, then we look at it and start wondering how it happened. But all of these issues that we face today, they have their roots back many decades old, and they've been simmering, and we have ignored them, and now it's reached a crisis point. So if we are more aware of all the things that are happening in the world, especially with poverty and the disparities and the exploitation, we still continue to exploit each other for the material needs of the rich. We exploit the poor countries, and it just goes on and on and on. And much of the violence that we see today has its roots in that kind of thoughtlessness and exploitation.
Okay. Well, how does non-violence work then, in the sense of different religions? I mean, obviously, what Gandhi did as well was to bring Pakistanis and Indians, or try to bring them together in a sense. How does that work as well with other religions nowadays in trying to implement non-violence? I mean, is it just a case of if we come from non-violence, then we would also be very okay with allowing and accepting other people's religion without trying to say that ours is the only one, and all the rest are not true?
Yeah, you see, again, I go back to the culture of violence. Because of the culture of violence, we have created all these differences and disparities between people, and we get stuck with that, and so we start promoting our own as being the best, and so on, and that is what leads to a lot of the conflict today. If we have better relationships with people, and we respect people for whoever they are and what they are, and not begin to judge them and keep them away from us, then we will have better relationships, and we will be able to work with each other, for each other, and create a better world. But today we don't have that kind of a relationship. We are always we are labeling people to identify them. We label them by religion, by economic standing, by language, by nationality, you name it, and we have a label. And we look at people not as human beings, but identify them by those labels. Oh, he's a Islamic, or he's a Christian, or he's a so and so, and all these labels, and we dehumanize people, and that is something that we don't need to do. We need to learn to look at each other as human beings, feel each other's pain and joy, and share in that, and become one large human family. One of the things that grandfather tried to do through his ashrams, the ashrams that he created during his lifetime, was to expand people's beliefs in treating the larger human family as a family, breaking away from this nuclear family syndrome that we have. Today we are just more concerned about our own nuclear family rather than looking at all of humanity as part of human family.
That's so beautiful what you've just said there. If only, as you've just said, if only we could see that we are all family, and yet, it's not just our immediate family, but everything you've just said there, and in regards as well to how people could, embrace non-violence and just embrace that we are all connected and that we don't label ourselves as this or that. How could people reach that place? How do people get there? Why would people want to go there as well?
Well, if we want to live in peace and in joy and happiness with each other, then that is the kind of attitude and relationships we need to learn to cultivate. Then we can create peace there. Otherwise, we are going to continue to live in fear, and that fear is mounting by the day because of the terrorism and the fear of being attacked and all that going on now. Everybody is constantly afraid of their own shadows. And that's not a life worth living. What we need to do is to have joy and happiness and live together and grow together. And that can happen. It's not impossible if we make that happen throughout the world. One thing that I always talk about, and this whole culture of violence has expanded to such an extent that at the national level, every country has its foreign policy that is based on what is good for them, not what is good for the world. We don't think about the world. We think only about our country. And we think that we can preserve and protect our part of the world and forget about the rest of the world. But no country can survive on its own. The security and stability of every country depends ultimately on the security and stability of the whole world. And if we don't take that view of securing the whole world and making it a better place for future generations, then no country, however rich and however powerful it may be, can survive on its own if the rest of the world is going down the tube.
Yeah, but you're talking about from a government perspective there, because you probably would say that you can't go out and change the world by yourself. You just can't do it, but you can change yourself. But what you're talking about there is the governments of different countries have to take that perspective. Individually, we can't.
Exactly. We can do it individually as well as through governments to speed up the process.
You think we can?
And I take, like you said earlier, I take a group every year on a Gandhi legacy tour to India, specifically taking them to centers where individuals have made a tremendous difference in society by sacrificing their own pleasures to help the poor people. I'll give you an example of one case. It's called the Barefoot College. This person was an engineer who passed out of the IIT in India, and the IIT is a very prestigious institute, and the graduates from there get lapped up by big corporations in the Western countries. Now, this guy, when he got graduated, this was about 30-odd years ago, he told his parents he would like to go out into the village and work for the poor people for 1 year before he settled down to a normal life. And his parents reluctantly allowed him to go. And he went there and he got stuck, and he's been there for more than 30 years. But during the time that he started there, he realized that the people who were oppressed the most by poverty and by society were the women in the villages. And so he got the women in the villages together, and he taught them how to build solar panels through cheap materials and install them and wire their homes and everything from A to Z. And now in 6 months, those village women became solar engineers, and they started electrifying their village and other villages in the neighborhood. And he's continued to do that over the years, and now he's gotten thousands of women who have become solar engineers and have electrified several hundred villages in the state of Rajasthan. And the United Nations came to know about this program, and they requested him to train some of the African women in this work. And so for the last few years, he's been getting a steady group of African women coming for this 6-month course to this center in Rajasthan. And now, several African countries have started electrifying their villages through solar energy. Now, this was one man who made a difference in the lives of, I would say, almost several million people over 30 years. And there are stories like this, so many of them. And I've identified about 10 of them in India, where I take the group every year to go and see this and feel the inspiration and what individuals can do. We think that we are an individual alone. What can we do? We can't make a big difference. And so we don't do anything at all. But one person can make a difference in the lives of thousands of people.
It's so true, and that's a great story to share. That is, thank you for sharing that. By the way, I think really as well what that says is that you may not be able to change the world by yourself, but we all have gifts, don't we? We all have our own unique gifts. It may be you're gifted in computer technology, you might be gifted in entertainment, you might be gifted in machinery, whatever it may be, right?
Whatever it is.
And you can take these gifts over to places where they're less fortunate in the sense, and you could teach. For example, someone that I know recently went over to one of the camps in Greece, one of the refugee camps, and because he's got IT skills, he was been able to get them up and running with some internet. So you can give back in different ways sometimes. That's my point for the story that you just emphasized.
Exactly. We can all give in some small ways and bigger ways, and we can make a very big difference in the world if we begin to do that. But we get so caught up in our own lives and living for ourselves and accumulating more and more wealth that we forget our responsibility towards fellow brethren.
Now, this interview may help people remember that come across this interview, but for those who won't come across this interview or have not come across your work, will those people ever change? We want to see a world of change with people like that, but will people change to be like that? What crisis do they need to hit to change like that, I suppose? Everything's individual, isn't it? The journey that they're on.
Yeah, it's ultimately the individual who has to make that commitment themselves. We can only teach them, we can only show them, but ultimately they have to make that commitment, and if they don't want to make that commitment, they won't make it. But for every, and that's why I call myself a peace farmer. I go out and plant these seeds, and I hope and pray that I eventually get a good crop. And I've been seeing results of that over the last 30 years that I've been sharing this with people, and I can see people changing and transforming, and it happens slowly, but it will happen.
Yes, and I love that, a peace farmer. That is so, so good. And let's just remind people as well that the non-violence that Mahat taught basically was actually taken from scriptures of many religions. It didn't actually come from him initially, but it kind of came through him when he took it away from many of the big religions.
Exactly. I mean, the turning point in his life came about when he went to South Africa as a young lawyer, basically to set up a legal practice and earn money. But when he became victim of the prejudices in South Africa and the humiliation he was subjected to, physically thrown off the train, that was the changing point in his life. When he tried to get justice, and everybody, all the Indians in South Africa said, you can't do anything about this. This is the law of the land, and if the white man doesn't want you there, don't go there. Simple. And he said, no, that's not as simple as that. We need, everybody needs to be equal, and we need justice. And that's when the idea of nonviolence dawned on him. And then as he began to reflect on it and realize that all the scriptures talk about nonviolence and peace, but unfortunately we don't practice what we preach. We, in our religious institutions, the religious leaders tell us one thing and do something else. And so we have gotten into that whole thing too, that we go and pray and talk about peace in the church and in the temples and the mosques, but when we come out, our actions are very different.
So true. It's so yeah.
Yeah. So we need to live what we want others to learn.
Yes, and some great teachers have come on this earth to try to show us that as well. Just going very quickly back to what I was talking about religion, because I just want to emphasize is that what we were talking about there is the unity of all religions, and I've always been one to would really love to see the world come from that space, the unity of all religions. Wouldn't that change the world overnight?
It would. And grandfather saw this. One of his very famous quotations is that a friendly study, and he emphasized the word friendly, a friendly study of all the scriptures is the sacred duty of every individual. And he made that friendly study. He read all the books. He read the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Quran and the Gita and the Buddhist scriptures. He read all of them, and he came to the conclusion that every one of them has a little bit of the truth. None of them have the whole truth. And he used to describe it to us children in terms of 6 blind people who were asked to describe an elephant by feeling it. And they had never seen an elephant in their lives, so they had to just feel every part of the elephant and describe it. So the person who was feeling the legs of the elephant said, this feels like a huge pole. The one who was feeling the body of the elephant said, this feels like a huge wall. The one who held the trunk of the elephant said, this feels like a huge snake. Each one of them had a very different perception. They were not entirely wrong, but they were not entirely right either. And the only way they could come to figure out what the elephant looked like was if all of them put their own experiences together and tried to create the image of an elephant. And grandfather said that is where we are with religion, that all of the religions have that little bit of the truth, and they think that that is the full elephant, and they have that distorted vision of the elephant. So if all of us come together, and that doesn't mean a melting pot. He didn't believe that we should all melt into one religion. He said we keep our own religion, but we enhance our religion by understanding other religions and taking the little bit of truth from there to make our own religion better. And that way we would be able to create that kind of friendly relationship with other religions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Easier said than done, I think, because some fanatics may be, well, this is the only truth, the only truth, the only truth.
Well, actually, when we look at it, the fanatics are just a minority of the population, and they control us because of that fear and the violence that they resort to. If we get out of that fear and the violence, and if we all become more active, then those fanatics won't have a voice to or a standing in society. We won't fear them. But the unfortunate thing is that the majority of the good people want to do nothing, and that's why a few bad people get the power that we give them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, by the way. I want to get on to India. I just want to touch on very, very, very quickly the refugee crisis with the Syrian crisis as well that's taking place throughout different parts of the world. I mean, right now in Calais, the refugee camps are just getting bigger in Greece. They're just, what's not being told on the news is that these camps are forever being inundated, with new refugees coming in. It's not just India that's got a crisis in a sense, it's other places as well, isn't it? And it's, where do you start?
Yeah, this is, again, going back to exploitation and the crisis. And, Syria has become a victim of superpower rivalry. The Soviet Union and the United States don't see eye to eye. United States wants the Syrian government to be dislodged. The Soviet Union doesn't want it, and so the people in Syria are suffering the consequences of that. And that's what's happening all over the Middle East and many other parts of the world there. And, when we see this crisis only when refugees begin to come to us, and then we wonder what to do about it. But we can't ignore the refugees. We can't ignore their right to survival and security. We need to do something, and unless we have that vision of rebuilding that part of the world and helping the poorer nations get a better living standard, we are going to be faced with this kind of refugee problem forever. I mean, even before this Syrian crisis happened, there were lots of people coming from the poorer African and other nations into the Western countries. And the West took them in for some time because they needed young labor, because the Western nations are growing older and they don't have too many young people to work. And so they took in these refugees, but then, once you open the door, the flood comes in eventually and you get swamped. So, we need to take a more pragmatic view of this whole thing and not play politics with situations.
Absolutely. And just switching this over to India as well, because For some people that have not been there, including myself, just yet, there is unimaginable wealth and there is unimaginable poverty. There's no middle class. I don't think you're either very poor or you're rich. You either have or you do not have.
Yeah.
There's obviously, you're well aware of this, the technology boom that's been taking place in India. Outsourcing right now is a massive thing for companies in the US, UK, and Europe over to India. Technologically, there's been a massive boom with the internet there, but you get out of the bigger cities and it's very poor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we go and see when I take this group on a Gandhi Legacy tour. We go out into the villages and we see all the poverty and the destitution there. And that is where all these programs that I've been talking about have been trying to make a difference. And, in a sense, if you look at it, India is the microcosm of the world. It has the same, enormous amount of diversity in the country. The diversity of language, the culture, religion, everything, you name it, and we have all those diversities there. And then we have this whole rich and poor thing. Half of the population lives in abject poverty and the other half lives in affluence, and which is the same situation as in the world. On one of the groups that I took to India, I had a bunch of young women from Wellesley College. And Wellesley College is a very exclusive women's college where they are taught to be, liberty and equality and so on. And so these women, and we started traveling out into the villages by buses. And these women, after a few days, started getting a little uneasy because they didn't know how to take a bath from water from a bucket and pour it over them. They didn't have the showers in the villages there. And they didn't know how to wash their hair with that. So they started grumbling among themselves. How and when are we going to be able to sleep on a proper bed and have a shower and so on? And I overheard this, and on the sixth day, our tour reached the city of Ahmedabad. And then that year, somebody had opened a 5-star hotel. And as a promotion, they were giving rooms in this hotel at half the rate. So our travel agent organized for us to stay for a few days in that hotel. And when we got there and in the lobby and we were waiting for our rooms to be assigned, these women were so excited. They finally saw the type of luxury that they were, accustomed to. And they started dreaming of sleeping on a proper bed and having a shower and washing their hair and all that. And then once the rooms were assigned and they went up to their rooms, half an hour later they came back looking for me, saying, "Mr. Gandhi, we need to move from this hotel." I said, "What happened? You were so excited moments ago. Why have you suddenly changed?" And they said, "We went up to the room and we looked out of the window and we see all those poor people living below in those awful huts there. And we're living in this luxury and it makes us feel guilty." And I said, well, this is the reality of the world. And in the U.S., because you don't have a window to the other half of the world, you can shut them out and forget about them. And here, you're going to look at the other half of the world from the window every day that we are here. And you're going to learn a lesson from this and hope that you will see your responsibility to help the other half of the world gain a better standard of living.
So true. Yes, you've got poverty in the US, of course you have, but nothing compared to the nearly 1 billion people living in poverty in India, if I've probably even got that figure right. Yeah.
500 million, I would say.
Sorry,
the
half a billion.
The total population is about 1.1 billion.
I knew I got that figure wrong. Yeah, 500 million. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so with 500 million people living in poverty then, which is just
that's the poverty there is nothing compared to the poverty here.
no, I mean you can't get that figure 500 million. I can't even get that in my head. That's an enormous figure, and just very very quickly because I know we're running out of time here. Okay, so those girls felt guilty. That's a great, not guilty, compassionate. I think they felt as well. And when it comes to charity, there's two forms, isn't there, that you talk about: pity and compassion. Yeah. This is important.
Unfortunately, we tend to give out of pity. We feel sorry and we want to give something, and so we just dole out some money to a charity and think that is the end of our responsibility, and that way we are only oppressing the people more than we are helping them. What we need to do is to rebuild their self-respect and self-confidence, because anybody who has lived in poverty or oppression of any kind, the first thing that they lose is their self-respect and self-confidence. And because they've lost that, they can't stand on their own feet, and they feel that they have to be supported by society all the time. And we encourage that by just doling out more money and more charity to them, and oppressing them more, making them dependent on charity. What we need to do is to help them rebuild their self-respect and self-confidence and make them stand on their feet. Like the example of the barefoot college I told you about. If that guy had just gone there and given those money to those women and said, go and buy some good clothes or go and buy some food, they would have enjoyed it for a day or two, and then they would be back again to the same routine. But because he stayed there and he built up their self-confidence and self-respect by teaching them what to do and how to do it, they have become independent and they can become self-sufficient and stand on their own feet. That is the kind of activity we need, and that comes out of compassion, where this guy was willing to give up his own dreams of a high-paying job and a luxury lifestyle, and live simply with them, but to help them raise their standard of living.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for those who may be struggling with the non-violence aspect of Gandhi's work, in the sense that, if I'm being abused by someone, in an abusive relationship, for example, or if someone's treating me a bit like a doormat, it's very difficult to not, if you could, respond back to that. Some may respond back to that violently, maybe.
No, certainly, nonviolence is not about being a doormat. It's not about, there's a difference between pacifism and nonviolence. Pacifism is more passive. It's more, like ignoring things and not doing things. Nonviolence is more active. It's not being a doormat. It's not accepting injustice. It is standing up to injustice, but standing up firmly in peace and nonviolence, and not violently. Gandhi said, I am willing to die, but there is no cause for which I am willing to kill. And that is a good standard for all of us to believe, that we need to stand up for justice, but that doesn't mean we destroy the other person. But we can get justice in the right way and in a civilized way by being firm about our own commitment to it.
Out of curiosity then, what was your last memory of Mahatma Gandhi?
Well, the last memory was not a very pleasant memory, because he was about to go to this trouble spots where there was fighting between the Hindus and the Muslims. And he said that he wouldn't take me there because that's not a place for children to go to, and he went alone. I wanted so much to go with him at the time, but he insisted no, and so I had to let go and reluctantly, um, you know. So that was my final memory, and then after that, we as a family went back to South Africa, and just a couple of months after the last meeting with grandfather, we got the news that he was assassinated, and that was the great shock, and it really it hurt me so much. I just couldn't imagine anybody wanting to kill somebody who was so loving and kind person. And I think I expressed my feelings of anger to my parents, and I said if I was there, I would have throttled the person who did it. And that's when my parents reminded me of the lessons that grandfather had taught me. And they said he wouldn't appreciate that kind of talk. He would have appreciated you instead dedicating your life to see that this kind of mad violence doesn't take place. And that's how they taught me to forgive and to do something more positive rather than, seeking justice through revenge.
Well, all I can say is it sounds like you had some very good parents.
Yes, I did, and I'm very happy for that and proud of my parents and grandparents, and I think they gave me a wonderful foundation.
You know, I think that the way he left this world, your grandfather, it just immortalized him even more, didn't it? It just pushed his work even more, and he went out in a way that just made him even more infamous. Do you know what I mean? In one sense, yeah,
right.
So I do tend to think it's difficult to look at it this way, but I try to look at things that everything happens for a much bigger purpose that we're just not aware of sometimes until we see the bigger picture.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fantastic the work that you're doing. I know that you was a journalist for the was it the Indian Times for 30 years? Yep, 30 years.
Yeah.
And then you moved to America in 1987. Well, you didn't intend to move to America. You came to America to write a book, but
right.
you ended up staying there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that what are your plans right now then?
Well, I'm still going around and speaking on nonviolence at various places. I was in Scotland and Ireland just a couple of months ago, and I'm going to Brazil in a couple of weeks. So this is the type of work that I'm doing, and it may be a bit premature, but my book is coming out, and it's called The Gift of Anger. And it's going to be brought out by Simon & Schuster very soon. And so there's going to be some publicity about that very shortly.
Okay.
I'm making this premature announcement on your show.
Oh no, thank you. And is there going to be a website for that?
Yes, there will be a website, and there'll be a lot of publicity, and it's hopefully people will read that and be inspired to make the change in their own lives.
Well, okay. Well, we've been linking your blog site up on this interview, and I will try to get you. I know you're going to be a busy man once that book comes out. I will try to get you back on for that. That'd be fantastic. I just want to say, Arun, that it's been beautiful to have you on. It's been very empowering, and thank you for sharing in grandfather's messages. It's so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I look forward to speaking more with you.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on The More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.